Making a movie good enough to warrant a sequel is hard enough as it is. Now imagine making one so groundbreaking and so singular in its vision that the author of the novel you adapted is compelled to write a sequel despite having previously expressed no desire to do one. Well, in 1993, Steven Spielberg did just that. Jurassic Park is a film that truly needs no introduction. From Michael Crichton and David Koepp's thrilling and erudite script to John Williams' instantly iconic score and preposterously stacked cast, and of course, ILM's revolutionary visual effects, which were seamlessly integrated with life-size animatronics designed by the legendary Stan Winston to bring the film's prehistoric stars to life. Jurassic Park is a triumph on every conceivable level. The rare blockbuster that is as thematically rich and cinematically textured as it is exhilarating and accessible. Like the meteorite that wiped out the dinosaurs 65 million years before it, Jurassic Park's impact on our culture was seismic, and it can still be felt rippling through the film industry some 31 years later. So, when Michael Crichton committed himself to authoring a sequel, he knew he'd have to tread carefully. His original 1990 novel may have been popular enough to garner the attention of the most successful American filmmaker of all time at the height of his power, but now, Jurassic Park was a bona fide cultural juggernaut, and any attempt to continue the story would be subject to a degree of scrutiny Crichton had never experienced before. Despite having little to no experience writing a sequel, he knew that, in order to justify its existence, he'd have to straddle the razor-thin line between familiarity and novelty.
It's a very difficult structural problem because it has to be the same but different. Now, if it's really the same, then it's the same. And if it's really different, then it's not a sequel. So it's in some kind of funny intermediate territory.
His solution to this problem was to hone in on the scientific and thematic ideas that had underpinned the original story and treat them as a starting point from which to explore new yet related concepts.
My feeling was you had to address a different scientific subject. The first book to me was about sort of micro subjects and DNA and technology. This one is about macro subjects. It's about populations. It's about long-term trends. It's about extinction.
The original Jurassic Park is primarily concerned with the mechanics of evolution. John Hammond scientists use cutting-edge technology to recreate life from what remains of the dinosaurs' DNA, only for their creations to immediately evolve beyond their intended design and break free. At its core, it's a story about the limits of science and engineering in the face of the natural order. Creating life is easy, but controlling it is impossible. And believing that you can is hubris. No matter how clever we think we are, or how absolutely we believe our mastery over nature to be,
life, finds a way.
So, in the sequel, Crichton follows these concepts to their logical conclusion. Once this life has asserted itself once again, what happens next? Well, to put it simply, expansion. If life finds a way, no matter the circumstances, then it would continue to adapt until new constraints emerge within its burgeoning ecosystem. And with creatures on this scale, the only constraint that could realistically impede their development is the planet's incumbent dominant species, humanity. As life in what was Hammond's park continued to grow beyond its confines, mankind would stop at nothing to try and put the genie back in the bottle. As such, The Lost World is about the existential fight for survival in a world that picks no favorites, the struggle between coexistence, domination, and extinction. Rather than attempting to replicate the central conceit of the original Jurassic Park, that being the creation of the titular theme park, Crichton elected to draw inspiration from another seminal piece of paleo-fiction for the plot, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World. If the first Jurassic Park was about InGen's bioengineered dinosaurs breaching the barrier between their world and ours on the remote Costa Rican island of Isla Nublar, Crichton's Lost World, like Doyle's epic adventure, would be about mankind invading the dinosaurs' domain, an expedition into the primordial land of the dinosaurs, the mysterious Site B on the neighboring island of Isla Sorna. Leading this incursion would be Dr. Ian Malcolm, whose seeming return from the dead takes a page from yet another of Doyle's iconic works, Sherlock Holmes. You can criticize the decision all you want, but who better to take the reins of a sequel to Jurassic Park than the guy who was pretty much right about everything that went wrong in that story. However, Hollywood isn't a particularly patient town. So while Crichton was hammering out the details of his sequel novel, Steven Spielberg and David Koepp were also brainstorming ideas for a potential film sequel, dreaming up potential plot points and set pieces with the understanding that they'd eventually have to try and integrate their ideas into an adaptation of Crichton's nascent novel. Once Crichton finally released his long-awaited sequel in 1995, the script finally started taking shape, going through several iterations reactions, some that strayed away from Crichton's prose and others that aired closer to it, before finally hitting the big screen 2 years later in the spring of 1997 to mixed reactions. Yeah, it wasn't great. It was probably not what everyone was hoping for a sequel to one of the most spectacular blockbusters of all time. The general consensus at the time was that The Lost World Jurassic Park was, by all measures, inferior to its smart, tightly plotted older sister. Critiques ranged from issues with the structure to more granular concerns, like the inclusion of a young girl using her gymnastic prowess to kick a velociraptor from its perch, or the sudden gear shift into monster movie mayhem in the third act. To this day, even those who defend the film tend to concede it's a marked step down from its predecessor. I mean, not everyone, but there are those who feel that way. I'm not saying that. I agree. Because, I mean, as I'm sure you've probably guessed by now, I very much disagree. While the original Jurassic Park is a stone-cold classic and an infinitely more important milestone in cinematic history, I have always contended that The Lost World is almost just as good. Hell, no, it's not almost just as good, it is as good as the original Jurassic Park, albeit in a different way. It might not have the thematic complexity of the original, but it has a whole lot more going on than it gets credit for. Kept script, which beautifully weaves a number of original ideas and sequences through the basic framework of Crichton's novel, coupled with Spielberg's confident direction, which is somehow even more ambitious than it was the first time, makes for movie magic. Like another of Spielberg's maligned sequels, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And y'all know how I feel about that film. I got a video about it right there. You can go check it out. It's my favorite Indiana Jones film. Anyways, The Lost World is meaner and gnarlier than its predecessor, and just like Temple of Doom, I think it's all the better for it.
Are you hungry? Take a bite.
From the jump, Steven Spielberg and David Koepp waste no time setting the tone for this darker take on Jurassic Park, repurposing a scene they'd cut from their adaptation of the original novel to serve as the opening of the sequel. An opening scene can tell you a lot about a film, and this is no exception. I think the decision to lead with a scene that was omitted from the previous film illustrates a key difference in how Spielberg and Koepp approached The Lost World. In the original Jurassic Park, we open on a team of InGen workers attempting to move a raptor from its cage to its enclosure, only for a system to malfunction, prompting a worker to intervene and fall prey to the vicious predator on the other side of the bars. Conversely, The Lost World opens on a wealthy family who have unknowingly stumbled upon Isla Sorna, formerly the home to InGen's secret R&D facility, which has subsequently become overrun with dinosaurs. During the scene, a little girl ventures into the nearby trees and encounters a pack of Compsognathus, or, you know, we're just gonna say compies because I'm not saying that every single time. I don't even know if I said it right that time. Eased into a false sense of security by their small size, the girl attempts to engage with the critters the way, you know, one would any harmless animal, and the end result's not great. Now, thankfully, she doesn't die, but I mean, I'm sure that girl's gonna have to go through a fuck ton of therapy just to get out on the other side all good, because it was not nice for her. On paper, these two openings are strikingly similar, both revolving around the death or maiming of an innocent person as the result of InGen's malpractice. Of the two, the opening to the original Jurassic Park feels like it should be the more visceral. Sure, the near death of a child is conceptually a lot darker, but Jurassic Park's opening is imbued with an overwhelming sense of dread, thanks in large part to the work of cinematographer Dean Cundy. Bright floodlights pierce through thick clouds of fog as the black of night creeps in along the edges of the frame, obscuring the dense jungle that surrounds the scene, threatening to swallow it whole. It's unsettling on a deeply primal level. But I'd argue the comparative mundanity of The Lost World's opening is part of what makes it that much more disturbing. Unlike the first film, Spielberg and cinematographer Janusz Kaminski don't tip their hand until it's too late to look away. We're initially dropped into what feels like a completely different movie. The camera pans over Isla Sorna until we settle on a shot of a champagne flute as it's filled by a smartly dressed yacht crewman. A fabulously wealthy family is enjoying a moment of bliss on a picturesque beach as deep blue water crashes against the shoreline in the distance. The violence of the tide implies the danger that looms ahead. But like the mother's fretting over snakes on the beach, the danger is of no real concern in the foreground, with the father and daughter being more preoccupied with enjoying their time on the beach. It's an idyllic scene. So when the compies first show up, you're almost tempted to trust hates them the way the little girl does, somewhat against your better judgment. Maybe this will just be a cute little moment to humanize the dinosaurs before all hell breaks loose. Yeah, no, that's not the way this goes down. Because the scene doesn't telegraph the outcome until shit is just about to hit the fan, the violence hits like a compy to the jugular. And don't get me wrong, the opening to Jurassic Park is incredible, but you go into it knowing something fucked up is about to happen. It practically warns you ahead of time, and that's the point. The first half of that movie is designed to build anticipation. We know things will inevitably go awry, and so we spend the first hour bracing for it, in part because the opening scene has primed us for an impending disaster. It offers a peek behind the curtain to let the audience know what bellies the wonder of the park. But the Lost World's opening has a slightly different function. More than a tease, the scene is a statement of intention. We're shown peace and tranquility being disrupted in the most gruesome manner possible as a way to signify the conflict to come. Our world is about to violently collide with that of dinosaurs. Even the choice of victim is extremely revealing. In Jurassic Park, it's an employee, someone who isn't necessarily responsible for the creation of the park, but is, by virtue of their job, attempting to control nature, literally fighting to keep the raptor in its cage. In the Lost World, it's a civilian, a child, who encounters something they aren't prepared to deal with and pays for that naivete. It's survival of the fittest, playing out in the grisliest way imaginable, perfectly setting the stage for a story that will interrogate the consequences of the world John Hammond created. Another great detail of this opening is how much pulpier it feels right away. The innocent little girl wandering into the woods and getting approached by an unassuming threat is such a classic horror trope, and the way the compies swarm her is something straight out of a creature feature. We'll get into that a little bit later, but The Lost World is very much Spielberg playing tribute to the creature horror of decades past, right down to the film's twisted sense of humor, which is first exhibited in what is quite possibly the single greatest scene transition of all time. I know I'm like the 15,000th person to say this, but it simply must be acknowledged. This is so fucking good. It's so amazing. It still makes me incredibly giddy on rewatch all these years later. And it's extremely indicative of the film's overall tone. Whereas the original Jurassic Park offers a more intellectual exploration of the horrifying consequences of science in between bursts of action, The Lost World fully leans into its creature feature roots. It's a monster movie, and proudly so. Because of this, it actually feels more closely related to a different Spielberg film, Jaws. Ian Malcolm even reminds me a bit of Chief Brody at times. Obviously, he's infinitely more eccentric than Brody ever was, with a bigger ego and a more sardonic sense of humor.
Sarah Harding!
How many Sarahs do you think are on this island?
But despite these cosmetic differences, Malcolm and Brody feel alike because of the comparable role they play in their respective stories. Both men spend a good chunk of their screen time desperately trying to warn people of the imminent danger they're in, only to be met with indifference or outright denial.
Our last chance at redemption.
John? No.
As I alluded to earlier, there's a certain brilliance in building the sequel around Ian Malcolm rather than Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler, who were the more obvious protagonists of the original story. Not only was Malcolm the first to be right about everything that went wrong at Jurassic Park, but chaos theory, which Malcolm spends most of the first film proselytizing, is probably the biggest thematic through line between The Lost World to its predecessor. Chaos theory is the philosophical explanation for everything that goes wrong in Jurassic Park, and likewise, it's framed as the driving force behind the dinosaurs' continued expansion and evolution in The Lost World. So if you're going to tell a story about mankind trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube or the genie back in the bottle, then there's really no better character to center that story around than the guy whose whole deal is trying to make people understand that attempting to control chaos is a fool's errand. And luckily for Spielberg and Kep, they had the foresight to cut Malcolm's supposed death from the original film, so they didn't even have to sidestep the issue to bring him back the way the book does. Another adaptational change The Lost World inherits from Jurassic Park is the decision to soften Hammond's character. Richard Attenborough's John Hammond is a radically more sympathetic character than his literary counterpart, who is far more intentionally malicious and ultimately dies at the hands of his creations in the book's climax. Conversely, Attenborough's Hammond is more of a tragic figure, a well-intentioned showman who can't see beyond the scope of his ambitions. He's essentially a more kind-hearted version of Carl denim from King Kong. As a result of this change, Spielberg and Koepp spare his life in the end, allowing the park's creator to escape the island, having finally recognized the folly of his actions. While this is a brilliant change that speaks beautifully to one of Spielberg's biggest thematic preoccupations, the complex relationship between a creator and their creations, it does kind of let Hammond off the hook a little. Hammond comes to an epiphany about how misguided his endeavors were, but it's only after unleashing unholy hell on countless people, including his own grandchildren, and in spite of the fact that he was repeatedly warned this would happen by people like Ian Malcolm, you know, the guy he brought to the island assuming he was a hacky pop philosopher only interested in collecting a check, because he didn't actually want the opinion of a professional, because they would have likely told him what he already knew deep down. Jurassic Park is a bad idea. So with Hammond still alive at the beginning of The Lost World, Spielberg and Koepp seized the opportunity to circle back to the idea that, well-intentioned or not, Hammond is responsible for the carnage that occurred on Isla Nublar and must be made to face that reality in some way. When Malcolm is summoned to Hammond's home, Hammond opens their conversation with an admission of guilt.
You were right and I was wrong there. Did you ever expect to hear me say such a thing?
But unlike the ending of Jurassic Park, the mere admission of guilt does not imply absolution. In fact, Hammond's apology is immediately followed by the revelation that InGen released the dinosaurs at Site B into the wild during the island's evacuation, and that those dinosaurs have subsequently managed to evolve past their lysine deficiency in order to live without human support to develop a fully functioning ecosystem. During this confession, Hammond jovially throws Malcolm's own words back at him.
Life will find a way, as you once so eloquently put it.
But what he intends as an endearing callback reads as something much more sinister to Malcolm. We're seeing the hubris that created Jurassic Park rear its head again in the guise of a lesson learned. What Malcolm had issued as a warning about the dangers of playing God with nature has been co-opted and its meaning subverted by the very man he was trying to caution. In just a few words, it becomes clear that Hammond doesn't regret his biological tinkering so much as he regrets trying to turn his creation into mass entertainment. And while that's not nothing, the real issue was always the God complex that underpinned that endeavor. Hammond's gone from thinking he can control nature to believing he has an obligation to protect the thing he never should have created in the first place. Like the park itself, this is yet another example of Hammond couching his egotistical need for control in altruism. If there's an undercurrent of Old Testament God and Jurassic Park's Hammond, then the Hammond of The Lost World has simply become the New Testament God. Undoubtedly a more benevolent God, but a capital G God nonetheless. Malcolm is understandably horrified by what he's hearing. Hammond truly thinks he's a changed man, but it's so obvious that he's not.
Don't worry, Ian. I'm not making the same mistakes again.
No, you're making all new ones.
As someone who has always felt the changes made to Hammond in the original Jurassic Park didn't do enough to justify letting him off scot-free, Malcolm's righteous indignation in this exchange is extremely cathartic and goes a long way towards making Hammond's character feel more morally complicated than he did the first time around.
So you went from capitalist to naturalist in just 4 years. That's something.
Something the film achieves without changing anything fundamental about Attenborough's Hammond portrayal. This myopia was always there, but now it's clear that it was a more innate character flaw than it initially seemed. The dude is completely self-deluded, and even when he's admitting to his failings, it's only in service of another self-aggrandizing delusion. And Malcolm calls him out for it.
Oh, if you want to leave your name on something, fine. But stop putting it on other people's headstones, John.
But because this is a smarter film, a much smarter film than I think most of us give it credit for, there's another dimension to this conversation that doesn't really become apparent until the very end of the film. For as wrapped up in his own benevolence as Hammond continues to be, his apparent God complex isn't completely unfounded. Jurassic Park was a mistake. Re-engineering the long extinct animals at all was a mistake. But now, the genie's out of the bottle. Hammond isn't wrong to feel somewhat responsible for the living creatures he created. InGen's dinosaurs are dangerous, and were they ever to break free of Isla Sorna, their mere existence risks upending the Earth's natural order irrevocably. But They didn't choose to be created. In playing God, Hammond made that choice for them, and so now he's responsible for them to some degree. To Malcolm and the audience, Hammond's attempt to assume that responsibility initially reads as the character doubling down on his God complex. I alone know what's best. But in a way, it also represents Hammond's attempt to own his mistake, protecting the creatures he foolishly created while preventing them from doing any more damage to the wider world than they already have is his burden. In other words, John Hammond has finally accepted the responsibility of being a parent, a theme that was very much at the forefront of the original Jurassic Park and is equally as prominent in its successor.
Hey, you want some good parental advice? Don't listen to me. Don't listen to me.
In The Lost World, this theme of parenthood, and specifically fatherhood, is primarily explored through Ian Malcolm, which shouldn't come as much of a surprise to anyone familiar with the first film. In Jurassic Park, Malcolm is something of a foil to Alan Grant. These two men couldn't be more opposed in style or substance, but of all their differences, their most salient point of contrast was how they each viewed fatherhood. Grant lacks a paternal instinct, so much so that he has essentially stalled his relationship with Ellie, who wants to settle down and have kids, but is holding out hope that her partner will eventually come around on the idea. Over the course of the film, Alan discovers the capacity to be a parent within himself by taking care of Tim and Lex as they try to escape the park. But even by the end of the film, it isn't something that comes naturally for him. Malcolm, on the other hand, is innately drawn to fatherhood.
Got any kids?
Me? Oh, hell yeah, 3. I love kids. Anything at all can and does happen.
However, despite this, you don't exactly walk away with the impression he's father of the year. Sure, he puts his life on the line to save Tim in a grand display of compassion, but it's clear he isn't necessarily cut out for conventional fatherhood. He's kind of a playboy, always on the lookout for the future ex-Mrs. Malcolm. He may have 3 kids and he may sincerely love them, but it doesn't really seem like he's very involved in raising them. After all, his whole shtick is chaos, which, while prophetic when it comes to heady philosophical debates about nature and technology, almost comes across like an excuse to live without responsibility in his personal life. I mean, why try to be a stable parent when life is inherently chaotic, right? This may only be subtext in the first film, but The Lost World runs with it in a big way, establishing Malcolm as a bit of an absentee father. He clearly wants to be a good dad and has been making strides to be more involved in at least one of his daughter's lives, but he's inconsistent, flaky even.
You like to have kids, but you just don't want to be with them, do you?
With this extra context in mind, Malcolm's reaction to Hammond's attitude towards Site B makes even more sense. Beyond his frustration that Hammond doesn't seem to have learned the right lesson from Jurassic Park and continues to put people's lives in jeopardy in service of his pet project, he also doesn't fully understand Hammond's sense of responsibility for his creation, because that's always been the part of fatherhood that's eluded him. One of the smartest decisions David Koepp made when writing the script for The Lost World was turning the character of Kelly into Malcolm's daughter. Yeah, I know, gymnast raptor window kick, I hear you. I think it's fun and it's fine in the context of this film.
That was great.
But whatever your issues are with that moment, Kelly is a fantastic addition to the film, if only because of how she helps literalize the theme of parenthood that runs throughout the story. Like Tim and Lex's relationship with Grant in Jurassic Park, Kelly and Malcolm's relationship gives the film's more abstract exploration of parenthood some much needed emotional heft. It'd be one thing for Malcolm to come to understand why Hammond feels so strongly about protecting dinosaurs by simply going back to the island, but it's another thing altogether to demonstrate this change of heart via the progression of his relationship with his daughter, whom he loves dearly, but he doesn't know how to support. I feel like Malcolm is one of the more interesting Spielberg fathers old Stevie has put to screen over the years. He's distant, as so many Spielberg fathers are, but it isn't for a lack of intimacy or even emotional intelligence. It would have been real easy to characterize Malcolm as a stereotypical absentee father, cold, detached, and aloof, but there's nuance to his portrayal here that makes his evolution over the course of the film all the more gratifying. Malcolm is a genuinely good dad to Kelly, or at least he's trying to be. We're told he hasn't always made that effort, but he's trying to do better now. He isn't withholding or even neglectful necessarily. In fact, he loves and cares for her and does his best to communicate that affection frequently. He's just not around as much as he ought to be, and seems blind to how that absence undermines his words.
I'm your daughter all the time, you know. You can't just abandon me whenever opportunity knocks.
You can express all the love you want, but if your actions don't reflect it, the sentiment falls flat every time. Kelly even tells him point blank that she wants a more structured relationship with him, but he simply can't wrap his head around it.
But I want you to crack on me a little bit, ground me or something, send me to my room.
Why would I? Because you turned out to be so beautiful and brilliant and powerful. A queen, goddess, my inspiration.
Put another way, Kelly wants a father figure, and Ian doesn't know how to be one, even though he's legitimately trying. As a result, The Lost World isn't so much the story of a guy realizing he's been an absentee father and learning to care for his daughter. Malcolm's already come to that realization. Rather, it's the story of a father learning how to be consistent, to be present for the long haul, even during the moments that don't seem as important, like lazy days on the couch or gymnastics recitals. Yep, you heard me. I'll defend that moment till I'm blue in the face. As silly as it might seem, it's more than just a little action beat for Kelly. It's just as much there to demonstrate a change in Malcolm, who's becoming more directly involved in his daughter's life, going from the guy who didn't even know his daughter wasn't doing gymnastics anymore to the guy who's indignant about the fact that she got cut because she's obviously very good.
The school cut you from the team?
The film could probably have used a few more moments like this to really delve into Malcolm's growth on that front, as there are points in the film where he and Kelly's relationship gets a bit lost in the shuffle, but thankfully Spielberg and Kep do something really smart to bolster his growth as a parent. They set up the T-Rex and its child as a parallel to Ian and Kelly. In fact, a big part of why Kep decided to make Kelly Malcolm's daughter in the first place was because a large portion of the film concerns a pair of T-Rexes attempting to recover their child from the humans, and he saw an opportunity to mirror that conflict in Malcolm's personal journey. In the same way that the mother T-Rex leaves its baby in the nest only for it to be abducted by hunters in her absence, Kelly enters the story, having been left in New York by her mother, who we're told is off traveling in Europe, only to be subsequently left behind by her father as well, who's heading to Isla Sorna to save his girlfriend Sarah. Kelly, not wanting to be abandoned yet again, sneaks aboard the boat and gets wrapped up in a situation that finally necessitates her father's attention. Likewise, the T-Rex parents come to their child's aid upon hearing the cries for help and then stop at nothing to get it back. The film really commits to this parallel, frequently framing Malcolm in ways that visually recall the T-Rex, my favorite of which being the moment Malcolm emerges from the waterfall moments after the T-Rex did the exact same thing. His arrival is essentially played like an inverted jump scare where you think the T-Rex is returning for one last bite, only for it to turn out to be Malcolm. It's very subtle but effective, and the film is full of little visual parallels like this, and the comparison makes a lot of sense. Like a T-Rex, Malcolm is a bit of a rogue. He cares for his child and wants to protect her, but isn't necessarily built to be a nurturing creature. There's an instinct there, but it's not until it's tested that it becomes readily apparent. Which brings us back to Hammond, who also seemingly discovers a more nurturing side to his personality when his creation is threatened. Although in his case, the threat is coming from inside the house, or rather, inside the boardroom, if you will. Hammond's nebbish nephew, Peter Ludlow. Oh god, I love this character. He's taken control of InGen since the events of Jurassic Park and is hell-bent on restoring the company's reputation. He is Hammond's darkest impulses come to life, an amalgamation of the literary Hammond and Biosyn's Lewis Dodgson.
Dodgson! We've got Dodgson here!
Who was the villain of Crichton's Lost World. Unlike Hammond, who, for all his faults, has an emotional connection to the dinosaurs his scientists have created, Ludlow has no such attachment. He's a cold-hearted capitalist who wants nothing more than to co-opt his uncle's enterprise and get the show back on the road. I mean, literally. To him, the dinosaurs on Isla Sorna are nothing more than assets. Assets he feels entitled to and whose recapture he views as the only way to recoup InGen's significant losses in the market. The desire to exploit the dinosaurs in the same way Hammond once did triggers a protective instinct within Hammond and drives him to put together an expedition to the island in the hopes of sabotaging InGen's operation. Whether it's Hammond, Malcolm, or the T-Rex, The Lost World is ultimately the story of three parents trying to protect their children from danger.
InGen is my responsibility now, Doctor, and I will jealously defend its interests.
But Ludlow doesn't just represent a threat to Hammond's creation. No, he represents a threat to nature itself. He is the embodiment of extractive capitalism, viewing the natural world as a resource that he needs to commodify and control. This idea of commodification and exploitation is a core theme in the original Jurassic Park, but because the cinematic Hammond is more sympathetic than his literary counterparts, some of the novel's more scathing living commentary is lost. Sure, there's still Nedry and Dodgson, whose combined greed compromises the park and causes the disaster that follows, and yeah, that disaster is only made possible by Hammond's penny pinching, but because the film frames Hammond as more idealistic than outright greedy, a lot of the book's sharper critiques of capitalism fall by the wayside, which doesn't really diminish the quality of that film in any way, but it's a notable omission, one that is finally given its due in The Lost World, thanks to Ludlow. Ludlow and InGen by extension are greed incarnate. They literally want to do Jurassic Park again, despite the risks, because it's the only way to ensure their intellectual property retains value. And they'll do anything, up to and including abuse and torturing the animals to facilitate their plans. The fact that the InGen exposition resembles a big game hunt is no coincidence. These people are the nadir of mankind's capacity for unethical predation.
Predators don't hunt when they're not hungry.
No, only humans do.
Oh, you're breaking our heart.
The only real point of contrast in the InGen party is Roland Tembo, played by the incomparable Pete Postlethwaite. A big game hunter, Tembo isn't motivated by financial greed. In fact, he turns down his fee. However, this doesn't mean his motivations are any less selfish. Tembo is on the expedition for one reason and one reason only: to bag a T-Rex. Having hunted every other game under the sun, Tembo sees the Rex as the only trophy worth pursuing left, and he becomes so consumed with this goal that he ends up losing the only thing that made hunting worthwhile for him: the camaraderie of his longtime hunting partner, AJ, who dies as the result of a chain reaction that Tembo himself sets off. Throughout the film, Tembo claims to live by a code of ethics that sets him apart from the likes of Ludlow and the InGen mercenaries, but that code amounts to little more than some nice words. In the end, his soul is just as tarnished as anyone else on the expedition, a fact that he only comes to realize once it's too late. Left with nothing but regret for his participation in the affair, he turns down Ludlow's offer to work at the San Diego park and washes his hands of it.
I believe I've spent enough time in the company of death.
It's a powerful moment that lays bare the immense spiritual cost of the exploitative worldview Ludlow and InGen personify. These are people who won't stop taking until they either destroy themselves or everything around them. In stark contrast to the InGen expedition is Hammond's team, which intentionally resembles a ragtag group of environmental activists. Nick Van Owen even has a history of working for Greenpeace, where Ludlow and Tembo and the InGen mercs have come to Isla Sorna to pillage the land and extract its resources. Hammond's team wants to preserve the island's emerging ecosystem. Sarah Harding is a behavioral paleontologist who wants to foster a deeper understanding of dinosaurs by dispelling the notion that they're mindless, vicious lizards. She wants to prove that even the most fearsome dinosaurs, like the T-Rex, have the capacity to nurture. Likewise, Nick has committed himself to protecting the inhabitants of Isla Sorna, but he doesn't just want to raise awareness, he's there to disrupt InGen's poaching efforts by any means necessary. But for as well-intentioned as both Nick and Sarah are to a T-Rex, their actions are indistinguishable from those of the poachers, a reality that becomes unavoidable when they bring the injured baby Rex into their trailer. A noble act that winds up being the biggest mistake they could possibly make. And this, I think, is the point the film is ultimately driving at. Unlike children, who we must be present for, nature requires our absence. We aren't nature's parents. We don't know best for it, and therefore, it isn't our place to interfere in the natural order. Which isn't to say it's not morally right to stand against mankind's attempt to dominate and destroy nature, but it's important to remember that this position doesn't grant us ownership over nature. It's easy to start believing that the act of protecting something puts you above the thing you're protecting in some way, but that attitude is almost as dangerous as thinking you have control over nature. And in fact, it looks awfully similar from the outside. It's unnecessarily paternalistic. Nature will always resist our interference, good or bad. So we should just take a step back and let nature do its thing. If the film has one central message, this is it. The best way to live in harmony with nature is to leave it alone.
These creatures require our absence to survive, not our help. And if we could only step aside, life will find a way.
The animal exists on the planet for the first time in tens of millions of years, the only way you can express yourself is to kill it.
An underrated aspect of The Lost World is the way Malcolm's previous experience on the island informs his character. He isn't quite the same man he was at the beginning of Jurassic Park. I mean, he's recognizably the same character, but just a bit more subdued, almost as if suffering from PTSD, although not in an overly noticeable way. He just seems changed by his time on Isla Nublar. He's still as witty and charming as he ever was. I mean, he's still played by Jeff Goldblum, for God's sakes, but there's an added wariness behind the eyes now. He honestly feels like a war veteran at points, someone who's suffered a great deal of trauma but doesn't seem to realize how much it has changed them. In addition to making the film feel like an earnest continuation of that first film, it also makes Malcolm an ideal audience surrogate. Like Ian, we've also been to Jurassic Park and kind of already know what to expect when the dinosaurs show up. In fact, Malcolm lays bare pretty early on.
Oh yeah, that's how it always starts. But then later there's running and screaming.
So it's a wonder then that The Lost World still somehow manages to make the dinosaurs feel as awe-inspiring and as terrifying as the first time you saw them. Sequences like the Stegosaurus encounter and the InGen dino hunt are legitimately jaw-dropping to this day. Like, the bit where the motorcycle passes under the Brachiosaurus's legs gives me chills every goddamn time. That shit is so fucking cool, dude. With the exception of the Stegosaurus scene, Spielberg doesn't spend as much time marveling at the creatures as he did the first go-around, because he knows he's already played that card. But in a weird way, that lack of reverence almost enhances the spectacle. The dinosaurs are placed in the frame with such little fanfare that you really do start to forget they aren't real animals interacting with the environment. By the same token, the dinosaurs feel as dangerous as they've ever felt. Even the herbivores are treated as potential threats this time. You truly feel like you're watching people navigate a volatile environment where any wrong move could get them killed, largely because, I mean, it often does. So many people bite it in The Lost World. The surplus of antagonists means Spielberg doesn't have to be as selective with the kills as he was in Jurassic Park, and as a result, the InGen mercenaries essentially become cannon fodder, allowing the filmmakers to indulge in some B-movie ultra-violence. And because these InGen pricks are so goddamn unlikable, many of these deaths are just as darkly comedic as they are gruesome. There's echoes of every dumb character who's ever been killed in a slasher film in the way these deaths are often signposted by an act of incompetence or outright cruelty, as if Mother Nature is dishing out a form of karmic justice. Easily the best example of this is Peter Stormare's character, Dieter, who spends the first half of the film brutalizing the compies for no reason other than his own amusement, only to be ambushed by them while taking a piss. All the while, his co-worker misses his pain screams because he's too busy listening to music. It's so fucking funny. It's beautiful. It's poetic. It's incredible stuff. Having some malicious humans in the cast isn't just a good excuse for fun deaths, though. It has the added bonus of making the dinosaurs infinitely more sympathetic than they were in Jurassic Park. While there were certainly select moments of empathy, such as the scene with the Triceratops or the Brachiosaurus in the treetops, the carnivorous dinosaurs were never really extended the same emotional connection, which makes sense for the story being told. The whole point of Jurassic Park is that these are abominations that have been resurrected against the will of nature. You're not necessarily meant to be thinking about them as beings worthy of empathy, but The Lost World is explicitly about the fact that regardless of the circumstances of their creation, these creatures are alive and must be allowed to exist independent of human interference. So it stands to reason that they'd be framed more empathetically. Putting the dinosaurs in situations where they're simply reacting to human interference allows the film to deliver the carnage the audience expects while maintaining a degree of sympathy for them. The raptors are probably the only dinosaurs still treated like outright monsters. They'll have to wait till JP3 to get their redemption.
Alan.
But that's about the only exception. Even the T-Rexes get to be empathetic. After all, they just want their kid back.
Hang on, this is gonna be bad.
It's this balance of terror and empathy that elevates just about every action beat in the film, including what I consider to be the single greatest set piece in the entire series, the cliff sequence. Oh my god. Oh my god, this scene is so fucking good. The intercutting between Malcolm, Sarah, and Nick climbing through the trailer, and Eddie frantically trying to secure the trailer as it slips further and further over the edge. The intermittent bursts of violence that punctuate the uneasy calm of the trailer's slow descent. The mama and papa T-Rex communicating with their child through the glass as they try to break him free. It's unreal, dude. Comfortably among the best set pieces ever made, never mind just Jurassic Park, because while the spectacle is there, it's bolstered by the fact that I care about every party involved. Imagine watching the T-Rex break out in the first film and legitimately caring about the wants and needs of that T-Rex, because that's exactly what this scene achieves. It's the moment where the film's themes of parenthood truly coalesced for me, because I found myself subconsciously empathizing with the goals of non-speaking animal characters and comparing them with Malcolm's, who had just pleaded with his daughter to stay hidden in the trees moments before. Up until this point, the fact that there were so many allusions to parenthood in the film could easily be discounted as an attempt to pay lip service to the themes of the original, but once this sequence gets going, it becomes abundantly clear that the Lost World is fully engaged in its exploration of parental dynamics.
I think that the debate over the parental instincts of the T-Rex is now academic.
And then there's the visceral impact of the sequence. I mean, it's pretty much the perfect Spielbergian set piece, with each element building on the last until the rate of escalation becomes so unsustainable it has to relent. Without hyperbole, I think it's my dark horse pick for the most influential action scene of Spielberg's career. At the very least, it's in the top 5. You see echoes of it everywhere in the MCU, in other Jurassic films, in Mission Impossible. Hell, you even see it in video games like Uncharted. And to cap it all off, it culminates in what is without a doubt the gnarliest death in the whole series. Eddie is probably the only undeserved death in the film, and for it to come right after he saves everyone's asses is so fucking mean-spirited, and I have to applaud the audacity. It's grotesque as hell, but also makes for a vivid image that I've never forgotten. I mean, I think I saw this film before I saw the first Jurassic Park, and the image of Eddie getting snapped in half was seared into my brain and haunted me for years to come, that I don't think I ever went back and watched the original Jurassic Park until I was, significantly older. It was, goddamn, Spielberg. I mean, you fucked me up as a kid there. So you know what? Kudos to Spielberg for making a moment of heroic self-sacrifice this inelegant and profoundly unceremonious, rather than copping out and giving Eddie a good death.
You might show a little respect.
Just because the audience likes him. It's yet another moment that makes the stakes feel real, because as we should all know by now, nature doesn't play favorites. No matter how you feel about The Lost World, I don't see how anyone could hate this sequence. The finale, on the other hand, well, that's a slightly different story.
There's a dinosaur in our backyard.
Ever since The Lost World hit theaters back in 1997, a persistent criticism has been that the film falls apart in the third act. Not only does a T-Rex tearing through San Diego veer a bit too far into monster movie madness for a franchise that previously billed itself as an elevated interpretation of the genre, but it also feels a bit tacked on. And for the most part, these criticisms are valid. I mean, I disagree, but they're valid. When Koepp and Spielberg were bouncing around sequel ideas while they waited for Michael Crichton to finish his novel, one of the concepts they came up with was the T-Rex making it to the mainland and going on a King Kong-style rampage. So when they finally started adapting the second book, they toyed with including this moment as the big third act set piece. Although Koepp felt it was an appropriate escalation of the film's stakes, Spielberg was unsure, worrying it might feel tonally out of step with the rest of the story. Although he eventually relented, his concern wound up being fairly prescient. After an hour and a half of woodland-based hijinks, the pivot into a full-blown monster mash was a difficult buy for a lot of people. And to make the transition even more jarring, most of the principal cast is totally MIA. Nick and Kelly are just gone, and the remaining few in-gen regulars are also absent. It's more or less just Ian, Sarah, Ludlow, and the T-Rexes, which makes the sequence feel even more detached from the rest of the movie. But while I'd be lying if I said the transition from Isla Sorna to San Diego felt completely seamless, I can't fully endorse this line of criticism, because to me, it's where the film was heading the entire time. Obviously, San Diego is set up pretty early on, with Ludlow's plan revolving around opening a new park in the city, but beyond any foreshadowing in the plot, the decision also makes thematic sense. The Lost World is about InGen's attempts to run the clock back and undo the inevitable. They want to force nature back under their thumb by launching a violent incursion into enemy territory. So it only makes sense for that incursion to be reciprocated at the end of the story, for the dinosaurs to invade their world. And invade they do, or at least, you know, one angry T-Rex does. And it's so fucking sick. It's great. I don't know what more you want from movies if you can't find some joy in watching a dinosaur smashing through buses and street signs. He even gets to eat David Koepp at one point. So I guess if you really don't like this film, you can at least enjoy that. If that isn't enough to convince you, it might help to understand that one of Steven Spielberg's biggest influences while making both of his Jurassic films was 1933's King Kong. Michael Crichton may have been riffing on Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World when writing the book, but the film adaptation, just like its predecessor, owes an awful lot to Kong. And nowhere is that influence more apparent than in San Diego, where a terrified and sympathetic monster rages through an urban environment in search of an object of its affection. The whole thing is so overtly evocative of King Kong that I'm honestly a little surprised they didn't have the Rex Summit One American Plaza at the end. Given how much Jurassic owes to the OG movie monster, I genuinely can't think of a more fitting conclusion to this story, or to Spielberg's tenure as the captain of the good ship Jurassic. So, yeah, The Lost World. What a fucking picture, man. I mean, you know, I think in the past I've been a little less inclined to say that I prefer this one to the original Jurassic Park, but you know what? I think I gotta say it. I think The Lost World is my preferred Jurassic Park film, and it's one that I revisit a hell of a lot more than any of the other films in the series. And while I don't think you can definitively say that Spielberg's Jurassic Park is better than its source material, mostly because the novel and the film are both excellent in their own ways, it's pretty easy to conclude that The Lost World Jurassic Park is a significant improvement on the book it's based on. Every change Koepp and Spielberg made enhances and refines the story Michael Crichton was trying to tell, all while adding an entirely new layer of emotional resonance that feels perfectly in tune with the sensibilities of the previous film and its filmmaker. I know this movie is not for everyone, but holy fucking hell is it for me. And look, even if you still can't get on board with the mean little sequel that could, at least we can all agree that John Williams' theme for The Lost World is one of the biggest flexes of all time. What do you mean he made a second theme for this franchise that also whips? I mean, it's absurd. But then again, life finds a way.